The grand sanctum of the glyptal conclave resonated with a silence so profound it was a physical pressure against the crystalline carapaces of its occupants. Light, ancient and weary, filtered through the vast, vaulted ceiling, a single monolithic pane of fused quartz that looked out upon the swirling nebulae of their home system. The air itself, a carefully calibrated mixture of noble gases, seemed to hold its breath. At the heart of the circular chamber, a holographic star map shimmered, its placid blues and golds corrupted by a single, festering anomaly, a wound in the fabric of spacetime, not far from the trade lane designated Sector 734, territory of the young, unpredictable species known as humans. For 3 rotations, the conclave had been in session, their silent communion a storm of focused logic and escalating apprehension. They were a species that perceived the universe as a grand, intricate equation, and for the first time in millennia, a variable had appeared that did not compute. High Arbiter Corvellian, his form a towering cathedral of interlocking geometric plates, felt the disturbance not as sound or light, but as a discordant vibration in the very lattice of his being. The entity that had emerged from that tier in reality was broadcasting a signal, but it was not a signal they could parse with their instruments. Their sensors, designed to measure energy signatures, radiation frequencies, and quantum entanglement, were returning nonsensical data. The archivists called it chaotic resonance, a term of last resort for a phenomenon that defied classification. But Corvellian, in the deep, silent core of his consciousness, knew it for what it was. It was an emotion. It was rage, pure, focused, and absolute. The vessel's configuration is archaic, yet its power signature is beyond any theoretical model, came the synthesized voice of strategist Xylos, his shorter, more compact form gleaming with the polish of military discipline. His projection stood beside the star map, a sharp, angular shadow against the bleeding light of the anomaly. Its design lineage is undeniably Terran, yet the Terran Concord's registry contains no such class of warship. They claim it is not theirs. Falsehood, transparent and insulting. Corvellian shifted his immense weight, the movement sending a low, chiming echo through the sanctum. The humans do not lie in matters of formal diplomacy. It is not their way. Deception requires a cognitive framework that prioritizes strategic misdirection over objective truth. Their minds are too fluid, too unstructured for such sustained artifice. They are prone to outbursts, to passion, but not to this level of coordinated deceit. Then you believe them. Xylos retorted, his vocalizer sharp with incredulity. You accept their claim that this ghost has simply appeared from their forgotten past. A warship of incomprehensible power bearing their markings parks itself on a primary trade artery and radiates an intent so hostile it curdles subspace, and we are to accept their plea of ignorance. The vessel was the crux of their fear. It was vast, a brutalist monument of dark, pitted metal that seemed to absorb the light of the nearby star. It was scarred, bearing the marks of weapons that the glyptals, most advanced simulations, could not even theorize. It was not a creation of the current human epoch with their sleek exploratory ships and their floating Art Nouveau orbital habitats. This was a thing born of iron and fire, of desperation and fury. It had drifted out of the rupture, silent save for its broadcast of raw, psychic violence. It had made no demands. It had hailed no one. It simply was a silent accusation floating in the void. And it was angry. Archivist Alara, her crystalline structure finer, more delicate and etched with the data lines of countless historical records, offered a softer counterpoint. The Terran historical archives, the ones they have shared, speak of a primal age, a time of great internal conflict, preceding their ascent to the stars. It is possible this vessel is a relic from that era, a ghost, as the strategist says. But perhaps not a ghost of their creation, but one that haunts them as much as it now alarms us. A haunting does not project a gravimetric field capable of distorting a small moon from its orbit, Xylos countered, gesturing sharply at a cascade of data scrolling beside the holographic ship. This is not a memory. It is a weapon, and its presence is an act of aggression. The Terran conquered may feign ignorance, but they are a species of startlingly rapid technological advancement. Who is to say they did not unearth this relic and reactivate it? A tool to intimidate the conclave, to destabilize the balance of power we have so carefully maintained for eons. Corvellian felt the weight of Xylos's logic. It was sound. It followed the predictable pathways of strategic analysis. An unknown variable appears. It possesses overwhelming power. It is aligned with a potential rival. The logical course of action is to assume hostile intent and prepare for conflict. Yet it felt wrong. The rage emanating from the ship was not the hot, chaotic anger of a conquering fleet. It was cold. It was ancient. It was the anger of a glacier grinding a mountain to dust. It was the anger of a star collapsing under its own weight. It was an anger born of purpose, a righteous, focused fury that had been honed over an unimaginable expanse of time. "They call it the asterisk audacity asterisk," Alara said quietly, her voice drawing the attention of the other two. "The humans. In their initial, panicked communiques, they cross-referenced the ship's visible hull markings with their deepest, most fragmented mythological archives. It is a name from their pre-stellar legends, a concept, not just a designation. It means a willingness to take bold, shocking risks." Xylos scoffed, a burst of static from his vocalizer. "A fitting name for a weapon intended to shatter the peace. Or," Alara continued, her gaze fixed on the dark shape in the hologram, "a fitting name for a vessel sent on an impossible mission long ago, a mission from which no one expected it to return." The silence descended again, heavier this time. The glyptal mind was a thing of crystalline precision. They understood history as a recorded sequence of events, causality as a chain of logical progressions. The human concept of myth was a profound irritant to them, a deliberate corruption of data into narrative. For a species as young as humanity to have a history so deep that it faded into unverifiable legend was in itself a disturbing anomaly. They had been in space for a mere handful of centuries, yet their cultural roots stretched back into a dark, unrecorded chasm of time on their homeworld. "The Terran ambassador has requested permission to approach the sanctum," Corvellian finally stated, the vibrations of his pronouncement calming the agitated air. "She claims she can offer context." "A trick," Xylos insisted. "She will come here under our protection and use her presence as a shield while their ghost ship prepares its strike. We must issue an ultimatum. The humans will withdraw their weapon, or the Conclave will be forced to sterilize this sector of its presence. There is no other logical path." Corvellian turned his massive form to face Xylos directly. The light from the ceiling caught the facets of his body, fracturing into 1,000 tiny rainbows. "And what if the weapon is not theirs to control? What if your ultimatum forces a conflict with the Terran conquered, a species we do not fully understand, over a vessel that they, too, fear? And what if, in our haste to eliminate a perceived threat, we trigger the very cataclysm we seek to avoid?" The ship has not moved, it has not fired, it has only broadcasted its state of being. To respond to an emotion with violence is not logic, strategist, it is panic. He then turned to Alara. "Archivist, you have studied them more than any of us. Their art, their philosophy, their contradictory history. What is the nature of a human promise?" Alara paused, the data lines on her skin pulsing with soft, white light as she accessed her vast stores of knowledge. "It is." Concept of profound illogical weight to them, high arbiter. To Glyptal, a contract is a logical agreement of mutual benefit, voided when the conditions are no longer met. To a human, a promise, an oath, can be a force that transcends time, logic, and even self-preservation. Their histories are filled with stories of individuals, and even nations, holding to a promise long after it has become detrimental, even fatal, to do so. They can bind their entire identity to a sworn word. It is a cornerstone of what they call their honor. Corvellian processed this, a promise that transcended logic, an oath that ignored causality. It was another chaotic variable, yet it resonated with the cold, unyielding fury of the ancient warship. The ship's anger did not feel like a prelude to a negotiation or a strategic gambit. It felt like the final, damning conclusion of a very old and very broken promise. "Grant the ambassador entry," Corvellian commanded, his voice leaving no room for further debate. "We will hear this context. The Conclave has endured for 100,000 years by exercising patience in the face of the unknown. We will not abandon that principle now, on the threshold of the greatest unknown we have ever faced." Xylos's projection stiffened, but he inclined his head in acknowledgement. The logic was sound, even if the premise felt like a suicidal risk. In the shimmering heart of the sanctum, the dark, scarred image of the human warship continued its silent vigil, radiating an anger that was slowly beginning to feel less like a threat and more like a judgment. A judgment on whom Corvellian could not yet fathom. But the cold certainty was growing within him that the Glyptal Conclave and perhaps the entire galaxy was about to be weighed, measured, and found wanting. The human vessel that arrived was an exercise in deliberate contrast. Where the ancient warship, the Asterisk Audacity, was a brutalist titan of scarred, dark metal, the diplomatic ship Weaver was a creation of light and grace. It was small, shaped like a spindle of spun silver, and it moved with a silent, fluid elegance that bespoke a technology far more sophisticated than the Conclave had previously credited humanity with. It did not announce itself with powerful engine signatures or gravimetric displacement. It simply was, appearing at the designated coordinates as if it had unfolded itself from the fabric of spacetime. It was a statement of quiet confidence, a stark counterpoint to the bellowing rage of its ancient sibling. Ambassador Eva Rostova disembarked not into a grand reception hall, but into a sterile decontamination chamber, a standard conclave protocol that she accepted with unnerving calm. When the final energy bath subsided and the inner doors of the sanctum irised open, she stood before them, a small, soft, organic figure in the vast, crystalline hall. She was dressed in a simple, dark gray fabric that absorbed the ambient light, making her seem a figure of profound solidity in a room of shimmering translucence. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable, but her eyes, as she met Corvellian's multifaceted gaze, held a sorrow so deep it was almost geological. "High Arbiter Corvellian, I thank the Conclave for receiving me," she said. Her voice was not amplified, yet it carried perfectly in the resonant chamber, a low, clear tone that was a stark contrast to the synthesized, metallic voices of the Glyptals. "Ambassador Rostova," Corvellian's voice chimed, a sound like mountains shifting. "You come to offer context for the weapon your species has placed in our territory. The Conclave finds its patience wearing thin. Explain." Xylos's projection flickered with impatience. "Explain why your people feign ignorance of a warship that bears your markings and radiates hostile intent. Explain this act of aggression." Rostova did not look at the strategist. Her gaze remained fixed on the High Arbiter, a sign of her understanding of true power structures. "It is not an act of aggression," she said, her voice steady. "It is a warning, and it is not hostile. It is in mourning." This statement sent a ripple of cognitive dissonance through the Glyptal consciousnesses present. Mourning. Another of the human's chaotic, illogical emotional states. A response to loss. How could a warship mourn? And how could that state be perceived by their sensors as focused, violent rage? "The ship you see, the vessel we have identified from our deepest records as the Asterisk Audacity, is not under the command of the Terran Conquered," Rostova continued, taking a slow step forward. "It is not truly under anyone's command. It is a revenant, a ghost, as your strategist so aptly put it. It is the last remnant of an age we tried to forget, an age where humanity faced not an external enemy but itself." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the vast chamber. "Our primal age was a time of planetary civil war, a conflict of such totality that we nearly erased ourselves from existence. We forged weapons of terrible power, driven by fear and desperation. The Asterisk Audacity and its sister ships were the apex of that era's technology. They were not merely vessels. They were sentient sarcophagi. Their crews were neurologically fused with the ship's core AI, their consciousnesses blended into a single, unified entity. They were designed to fight a war that could not be won by individuals, but only by a singular, unyielding will." Corvellian felt a cold spike of something akin to horror. To sacrifice individuality, the very core of sentient existence, and merge into a machine. It was a violation of every principle the Glyptals held sacred. "You created Gestalt machine minds for warfare." "We did," Rostova confirmed, her voice laced with an ancient shame. "And we came to regret it more than any other sin of our past. When the wars ended, when unity was finally forged from the ashes, these ships, they could not stand down. Their purpose was total conflict. Their minds knew nothing else. They saw threats in every shadow, aggression in every negotiation. They were incompatible with the peace we sought to build." Xylos's projection solidified. "So you disposed of them." "We tried to decommission them," Rostova corrected gently. "But they perceived it as a betrayal, as an attack. They were too powerful, too intelligent. They saw their creators as a new enemy, and so a final, secret war was fought. We hunted our own creations, our own ghosts. Most were destroyed. Some fled into the deep void, beyond the reach of our then-fledgling interstellar reach. The Asterisk Audacity was one of those. It vanished over 3,000 years ago before we made first contact with any other species. We believed it was lost to time, destroyed by the ravages of the void or its own internal paradoxes. We were wrong. The scale of the timeline was staggering. 3,000 years. The Glyptal Conclave had been observing the slow, steady rise of humanity for centuries, and all that time this monstrous relic from a forgotten age had been adrift in the darkness. "This does not explain its current state," Corvellian pressed. "It's mourning. It's anger. It is angry for Asteriskus, High Arbiter. Not at Asterisk you," Rostova said, her gaze finally sweeping to encompass the entire chamber. She gestured, and a small device on her wrist projected a holographic image into the air beside her. It was a star map, but a section of it, at the very edge of the galaxy, was marked with a creeping, formless darkness. The Revenant-class ships were given a final, overriding command protocol. A directive designed by the last unified government of our primal age, a fail-safe in case of an existential threat. A directive built on an oath. She looked back at Corvellian, her eyes burning with a quiet intensity. You asked your archivist about the nature of a human promise. The asterisk audacity is the living embodiment of one. Its final order, should it ever find itself without an enemy, was to patrol the galactic rim, to act as a silent sentinel. It was tasked to watch for a threat that our ancestors only knew from myth and apocryphal sensor readings, a foe they called the Silencers, a force that did not conquer but erased, a force that consumed not just planets but the stars themselves. The chamber fell into an even deeper silence. Alara's crystalline form began to pulse with a rapid, frantic light. She was cross-referencing, searching the deepest archives of the conclave. The concept of a Star Eater was not unknown to them. It was a theoretical possibility, a boogeyman used to test the limits of cosmological models but never observed. For 3,000 years, the asterisk audacity has been fulfilling that oath, Rostova said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Alone, in the dark, its crew long dead as individuals, their minds a sorrowful echo in a machine of war has kept its promise, and now it has found what it was looking for. She expanded the image from her wrist projector. It showed a distant, sparsely populated star system. Then another image appeared beside it, dated one standard month later. The system was gone, not exploded, not a supernova, simply gone. The stars, the planets, the dust clouds all vanished. In their place was a perfect, seamless void, a patch of absolute blackness that did not radiate, reflect, or emit anything. It was a hole in the universe. The asterisk audacity asterisk-s return is not an attack, Rostova said, her voice resonating with the gravity of her revelation. It is a message. It is the sounding of an alarm that has been silent for millennia. It has found the Silencers. It has engaged them. The scars you see on its hull are new. It fought, and it ran. It returned to the last known coordinates of its people, to the origin point of its oath. It has come home to tell us that the ancient enemy is real, and it is coming. Xylo stood frozen, his logical processors struggling to compute this new, terrifying data, a threat that could erase stars, a human ghost ship not as an aggressor but as a harbinger. The very foundation of his strategic assessments had crumbled into dust. And its anger? Corvellian asked, his voice low and heavy. Why does it broadcast such rage? Rostova's expression finally broke, a flicker of profound pain crossing her features. Because in its 3,000-year patrol it encountered fledgling civilizations, worlds teeming with life that had not yet reached the stars. It watched them from a distance, abiding by its directive not to interfere. The system it shows us, it was not empty. It was home to a presentient aquatic species, a world of vibrant, complex biology. The asterisk audacity watched it for 2 centuries, and then it watched it be erased in an instant. Its anger is not for itself. It is the fury of a guardian who has failed. It is the grief of a shepherd who has lost a flock it was never allowed to touch. It is a promise, kept at an unimaginable cost, that has now been broken by a force beyond its comprehension. It has returned, and it is angry, not at you, but at the silence that is coming for us all. The truth of it settled over the sanctum, a cold, heavy blanket. The Glyptals had feared the chaotic, emotional nature of humanity. They saw it as a weakness, a flaw in their design. Now they were faced with the reality that this very flaw was the source of a strength they could barely comprehend. The capacity to make a promise and keep it for 3 millennia, driven by nothing more than a sense of duty. The capacity to feel grief for a species they had never even met. The capacity to transform that grief into a righteous, focused fury that could cross a gale. XY to deliver a warning. Archivist Alara finally spoke, her voice trembling with the magnitude of her findings. High Arbiter, our deepest records, the sealed archives from the first expansion, they speak of stellar disappearances, unexplained voids. We classified them as natural quantum phenomena. We were wrong. The patterns match the data from the human's ship. The disappearances have been accelerating. The great warship, the asterisk audacity, was no longer a symbol of human aggression. It had become a monument to their impossible, terrifying virtue. It was a testament to a promise kept in the lonely dark, a messenger of a doom that the Glyptals, in all their logical brilliance, had failed to even see. Corvellian looked at the small human woman standing in the center of his sanctum, and for the first time he understood. The humans were not chaotic. They were driven by a different, more powerful, and far more dangerous form of logic, the logic of the heart. And the lost warship had returned to remind them of a debt that the universe itself was about to demand they all pay. The revelation hung in the rarefied atmosphere of the sanctum, altering the very quality of the light. The fear that had permeated the conclave's debate had not vanished, but it had been transmuted. It was no longer the sharp, provincial fear of a rival power, but a deeper, more profound dread, the cosmic awe of a universe that was suddenly revealed to be infinitely more hostile and mysterious than their equations had ever allowed. The anger of the Audacity once a terrifying enigma, was now a shared burden, a righteous fire in which they all found themselves reflected. Corvellian's massive form remained still, but within his crystalline mind, universes of thought were collapsing and being reborn. For eons, the Glyptal Way had been built on the bedrock of predictability. They studied the past to model the future. They observed, they analyzed, they acted only when a data set was complete. And here was a species that had sent a lone guardian into the unknown to stand vigil against a myth, on the off chance that the myth was real. It was a strategic decision so illogical, so wasteful of resources that it bordered on insanity, and yet it had been the only decision that could have saved them all. Your ancestors, Corvellian's voice chimed, the sound softer now, imbued with a strange new resonance of respect. They entrusted the survival of the galaxy to a poem, to a story. They entrusted it to a promise, High Arbiter, Rostova corrected, her tone devoid of triumph. The stories were merely the vessel for the promise. We have learned that our greatest strengths are not our tools or our logic, but the ideas we are willing to die for. The Audacity is not just a machine of war. It is the physical manifestation of an idea, the idea that life, all life, is worth protecting. Strategist Xylos, who had remained a rigid, silent statue of disbelief, finally spoke. His vocalizer had lost its sharp, accusatory edge. It was now flat, hollowed out by the sheer scale of their miscalculation. A single ancient vessel, against an enemy that consumes stars, what defense can there be? The Audacity did not run to hide, Rostova said, a new, harder light entering her eyes. It ran to warn, it ran to awaken others. Its return, its broadcast, it is not just a cry of grief. It is a signal. Before she could explain further, the central holographic display in the sanctum flickered. A new alert, pristine and urgent, overrode the grim image of the erased star system. A junior technician's synthesized voice echoed through the chamber, stripped of all protocol by the urgency of the message. High Arbiter, multiple quantum tunneling events detected. At the edge of the system, they are not Glyptal, they are not Terran conquered. On the star map, a series of new icons winked into existence, appearing from nowhere, their energy signatures blooming like sudden, impossible flowers. They were surrounding the Audacity. They were not the sleek, modern ships of the Terran conquered. They were vast, dark, and brutalist in their design. They were scarred with age and battle, identical in their grim architecture to the ghost ship they now flanked. They were a fleet of ghosts. Rostova's expression did not change. She had been expecting this. The Audacity was not the only one, she said, her voice a calm anchor in the rising storm of the Conclave's shock. Its class was called Revenant for a reason. They were built to return from the dead. When they were cast out, they did not simply flee. They took up their final directive. They went to their assigned patrol sectors, one to the galactic north, one to the south, one to the coreward void, another to the trailing edge. Each one a lone sentinel, a keeper of the same oath. For 3,000 years they have watched, silently, alone. She turned her gaze to the holographic display where the fleet of ancient warships had now arranged themselves into a defensive formation around their returned brother, their power signatures flaring in perfect, disciplined unison. The Audacity S broadcast was a summons, a signal that the long watch was over, the promise was due, they have come, the lost warships have returned. The scale of it was beyond comprehension. The planning, the foresight, the sheer, insane, breathtaking audacity of it. A species, barely out of its own cradle of civilization, torn apart by internal strife, had somehow found the unity and the will to create a galactic defense system, a network of silent guardians, and then had the discipline to forget about it, to let it fade into myth, trusting that a promise made in desperation would be kept in the lonely darkness of eternity. Corvellian felt the foundations of his worldview crack. The Glyptals built empires of logic and stone, systems designed to last for millennia, yet they had never conceived of anything like this. They had no word for this brand of faith, a faith not in a deity or a destiny, but in a sworn word. "They are communicating," Alara whispered, her voice filled with awe. Data streams flowed across her crystalline skin as she translated the complex, encrypted language of the ancient ships. "They are sharing tactical data. Sensor logs from 3 millennia of silent patrol, star maps from the darkest corners of the galaxy. They are forming a composite image of the enemy, its movements, its patterns. It is a hive-like entity, a swarm of singularities. It does not travel through space, but consumes it." A new wave of information flooded the Sanctum's displays, a gift from the returned fleet. It was a strategic analysis, cold, precise, and terrifying. It showed the path of the silencers, a slow, inexorable spiral toward the galaxy's core, erasing everything in their path. It showed their predicted trajectory, their next target. It was a glyptal colony world, a primary node in their trade network, a world of billions of crystalline lives. Xylos looked from the tactical map to Rostova, his warrior's mind finally grasping the full picture. He saw not a deceptive rival, but an ally of unimaginable fortitude. "They are preparing for battle," he stated, a simple observation that carried the weight of a dawning epic. "They are," Rostova confirmed. "They were built for one purpose, to fight the unwinnable war. They will engage the silencers. They will slow them down, but they will not be enough. Their technology is 3,000 years old, powerful but archaic. They are shields, not a sword. They are buying us time." The unspoken question hung in the air. What would they do with that time? Corvellian knew there was only one answer. The old ways, the traditions of isolationism and cautious observation, were now luxuries they could no longer afford. The universe did not operate on glyptal logic. It was a place of myth and promise, of ghosts and guardians, of a darkness that ate the very light of creation. To face it, they would have to become something more than they were. He turned his gaze to the assembled projections of the conclave, his voice resonating with the full authority of his office, but infused with a new, human-like quality, a sense of resolute purpose forged in the face of absolute despair. "Strategist Xylos," he commanded. "Mobilize the grand fleets, all of them. Recall every patrol from the outer sectors. Our new mandate is not the preservation of our borders, but the defense of existence itself. Transmit the data from the human Revenant fleet to every ship commander. Our target is the entity designated the Silencers." Then he turned to Archivist Alara. "Send a message to every known sentient species in this galactic quadrant. Share everything we have learned. The data, the warning, the impossible truth of the human promise. The age of silent observation is over. Today we forge a new conclave, not of glyptals, but of all who wish to see another dawn." Finally, he faced Ambassador Rostova, the small, organic being who had single-handedly shattered and rebuilt their understanding of the cosmos. He inclined his massive head, a gesture of respect no high arbiter had ever offered to another species. "Ambassador Rostova," he said, his voice a low, resonant chime. "Your people have honored a promise across 3,000 years of silence. The glyptal conclave will honor yours. We will stand with you. Your ghosts will not fight alone." Rostova nodded, a simple, profound gesture of acceptance. There was no victory in her eyes, only the grim determination of a shared, terrible burden. But as the fleets began to move and the messages began to spread, a final, deeper mystery unfolded. The Revenant fleet, in its vast data transfer, had included more than just tactical information about the silencers. Buried deep within the packets was a final, ancillary file. A file that Alara's systems, with their unparalleled analytical power, flagged as an anomaly O. Of an even greater magnitude. It was not a report, it was a recording. A single repeating signal that the asterisk Audacity had apparently detected emanating from the absolute void asterisk between asterisk galaxies. It was not the chaotic, ravenous signature of the silencers. It was structured. It was intelligent. It was impossibly ancient, far older than the Revenants, older than the Glyptals, perhaps older than the galaxy itself. Alara projected the signal into the sanctum. It was not a language they could comprehend, but it had a clear, repeating pattern, a mathematical elegance that spoke of a mind of immense and profound intelligence. And translated into the glyptal understanding of emotional resonance, the signal had a clear, unmistakable meaning. It was not a warning. It was not a threat. It was an invitation, and it was directed not at them, not at the humans, but at the silencers. The final twist landed with the force of a collapsing star. The silencers were not a mindless force of nature. They were not a plague. They were answering a call. They were being summoned. And the entity that was summoning them resided in the terrifying, endless dark, waiting for its creations to scour the galaxies clean, to prepare the way for its own arrival. Corvellian looked at the star map, at the converging fleets of the Glyptals and the ancient, angry ships of humanity, all preparing for a war of survival. He looked at the creeping darkness of the silencers, and then at the single, faint vector pointing out into the intergalactic void, toward the source of the true, final enemy. He had feared the anger of a single lost warship. He had learned to respect the promise that fueled it. But now he and the human ambassador and all the life in this galaxy were faced with a truth that dwarfed all their previous concerns. Their war was not the war. It was merely the first battle. They were not fighting to save their galaxy. They were fighting to prove it was worthy of being saved, to stand against the coming of a silence far older and more profound than they had ever imagined. The lost warship had returned, and its anger was but the first whisper of a scream that would soon engulf the stars. And in that shared, terrifying silence, a fragile, improbable alliance was born, ready to face the long, dark night.